when Australia gets its act together, you are unbeatable. Okay? You have everything that it takes, except maybe the population.
Estimates of our optimum population range between 10 million and 480 million. Somewhere in between those two figures lies the magic number. But first determining that and then achieving it is the most important challenge facing Australia today.
$16,806,730. That's the latest estimate of Australia's population. That figure is barely the annual birth rate of China. But we do have the highest population growth rate of any developed country in the world.
We've managed that with a migrant intake of around 150,000 a year. Around 250,000 other new Australians are born every year. If we continued, Australia's population in the year 2020 would be 25 million.
Now, if we grow at something around about 2.5% per annum, which I suspect we will do from the mid-90s onwards, I'd expect a population starting to give perhaps 35 to 40 million quite a nudge. In other words, at least double and probably more. And perhaps beyond the year 2020, I could envisage a population of around 200 million by the time of our third centennial in 2088.
It is just fanciful. That's the word for it. It is, I could even be stronger than that. I think it's almost criminal to be talking about those numbers. It is just looking in a very narrow way indeed.
Manufacturing in this country will never succeed until it has a base of its own, somewhere around 40 million people.
That's not the question. The question is, what is the sustainable population in the long term that this country can carry? And I've got no qualms about it. Once the community debates all the issues, land degradation, greenhouse effect, problems of biological diversity, the sustainable population will be far smaller than it is now.
The first thing we should be doing is encouraging Australians to have their own children and pay them to have their children and give them every encouragement to support them, because they're our best investment for the future as our own Australians. Now, we should support that with selective, creative immigration.
They keep on coming because Australia's migration goal has not yet been attained.
And they've kept on coming. Since the post-war period, 4.5 million.
Because planned immigration is Australia's passport to progress.
It's a plan now tempered with mounting public resistance, perhaps for reasons more patriotic than scientific.
Bruce Ruxton is Prime Minister of Australia, a dictator. You're in charge. Tell me what sort of place Australia would be then in the year 2020.
OK, I'm the Prime Minister. Well, I'd certainly have a very in-depth look at the Department of Immigration, and I think I'd have a double-bladed axe.
The sudden expansion of communities made up entirely of new Australians has done little for the proponents of immigration. These tight knots of transplanted culture are a variation on assimilation that has garnered considerable public support for a new anti-immigration cause.
In the year 2020, we could see a situation where we have vast enclaves of certain races in this country doing their own thing. Now, that is not good. Any nation that is strong must be united. Now, we're not united at present. We've said to the new immigrants, you can have two nationalities if you don't mind. Fly your own flag, speak your own language. That's what we're teaching migrants, and I believe that is wrong. If you want to come to this country, you're Australian, full stop.
I swear by Almighty God
that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance
to Her Majesty
Elizabeth II, Queen of Australia,
her heirs and successors according to law,
and that I will faithfully observe the laws of Australia
and fulfill my duties as an Australian citizen.
Pronounced waves of migrants have distorted the age structure of Australia. As a population, we're getting older. Although continued high levels of immigration will hasten the broadening of our base market, it won't make the population any younger.
So what sort of Australia do you see in 30 years?
There'll be a much different composition of the population. I think you'd see a lot more non-whites. It'd be a mixed society, not so much in the manner that the U.S. is, but perhaps UK.
Will we have any reason to fear the Japanese in 2020?
No, absolutely no. Basically, you have gone through this cycle many times. You've outlasted the Brits, and you've outlasted the Americans, and you've outlasted the Arabs. What is there to fear? You know, it's your country. You're in command. I can't see any Japanese group, including our own groups, saying that we have ambitions to take over the country. Of course, if you decide that the Northern Territory is for sale, well, we'll definitely like to put in our bid, but it's another story.
They've dramatically increased their investment in our real estate and the tourism industry. They control some of the biggest and boldest developments in those spheres. They still rank behind New Zealand in the list of foreign investors in Australia, but that hasn't erased the perception that they're taking over the country.
At just 12 years of age, these Year 7 students have already begun learning the potential key to their careers. This is only their third lesson, and of course not all of them will persevere long enough to become fluent in what is a very difficult language, but it's a start. And this scene is no longer a rarity. There's been a spectacular leap in the number of young Australians taking up the challenge of Japanese.
And in the evening,
The change in our culture has never been more obvious. There's a desperate shortage of teachers of Japanese. That's to meet a demand that's grown more than 5 times over in as many years. It's just one indication of the Asianisation of Australia, a phenomenon that promises to go well beyond a recently developed taste for Thai food.
Don't you believe that Australia is a better place now than it was 20 years ago?
No, N-O, capital N-O, neon lights. No, I don't believe it's better now than it's ever been. No, I think that 20 years ago saw Australia a very stable, cohesive society. But not now. We're divided. Multiculturalism has divided Australia. In fact, it's fractured Australia, and I think beyond repair.
Well, Bruce Ruxton has probably never met the American futurist Paul Ehrlich, but if he did, he'd more than likely be interested in Ehrlich's contention that Australia doesn't need an immigration policy. He maintains that by the mid-21st century, Asian boat people will be landing here on these northern shores, not in thousands or tens of thousands, or even hundreds of thousands, but in millions. It won't be a migration, it'll be a virtual invasion, with practically nothing we can do about it.
The situation exists today in places like the United States and Hong Kong, where rich and poor share nothing more than a border. Planet Earth has an insidious illness. Some scientists diagnose the affliction as terminal. Our overpopulation is so gross that the world has an extra 3 people to look after every second.
We're on the road to 10 billion people. Like that, 3 people, over and above death. Another 3, that's what, 6, 9, 15, 18, 21.
Earth's natural resources will eventually be drained at a rate with which we can no longer cope.
It's an increasing problem. It's a problem that won't go away. But by gee, John Citizen can do something. In fact, he has to do something if he wants his great-grandchildren to have an existence.
It's a problem the world will have to tackle together. Australia may be called on to play a key role in this global team. We can't afford to be so naive as to think that this dilemma simply won't touch us, because one day it will.
Coming up on Australia 2020, Australia's coveted geographical position. Can we defend it in a world with a new set of rules?
What would you say to somebody who said there was no chance that Australia would face any military threat before 2020?
I'd say, I hope you're right, but I think you're living in a fool's paradise.